take a seat. Okay. We would welcome everybody on the table, so feel free. Okay, maybe we can start. Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. This is a session about safety, linking safety with climate change as part of the proceedings of the Transforming Transportation. So we welcome everyone on behalf of the bank. This is an unusual room for panels, so excuse the setup, but it's one of the board rooms that the World Bank Executive Director meets here. But thank you very much. I think the setup would work. I've been asked to always look at the panel, so excuse me if I don't look at the time, because I have to take questions with the panel, yeah? So without overdue, let me briefly, we have a distinguished panel from a very diverse background. We will start with a quick introduction. I will have also opening remarks from each of the panel members quickly. We can then take a question. Then we would like to open it up. And believe it or not, we are hoping we do all of that in 60 minutes. But feel free to stay a bit longer, but we don't want to take your time from the break and networking. So thank you very much, and we will welcome you again in person for this session. Let me start with my right. I Anne Jocelyn here from representing the United Kingdom Department for FCDO, Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. It used to be known as part DFID, and then now, as you know, the international development is part of the Foreign Office. And Anne Jocelyn is here as an infrastructure advisor. She's been looking at the transport agenda of FCDO for a while now, and she has particular interest in, of course, in financing, but also in economic growth research, where she leads the economic growth research team. And we are very happy and fortunate to be collaborating with the department for a while now. I have also on the right Ms. Becky Bavinger. She represents Bloomberg Philanthropies. I think everybody who works on road safety would know Bloomberg and the massive Bloomberg program in road safety that is now about 16 years, if I'm right, since 2007-8. It is the biggest really philanthropic-driven road safety program. And we have Becky here to represent the philanthropies. And many of you, of course, have seen. Now, the philanthropies is not only about road safety. There is also a lot of work on health and on climate. So Becky, maybe she will be a bit tackling, even though we will be focusing with her more on the road safety aspect. To the right, I have Mr. Kunal Joshi, representing the Government of India. He's a special advisor to the Minister of Road Transport and Highway for the Government of India. And as you know, the Government of India has taken really very big step recently as a federal system to launch what they call a state support program. It's one of the biggest road safety program in developing countries nowadays. We look forward also to hear from that experience, Mr. Joshi, and welcome to Washington. We go from a federal states to a city government, where we have Ms. Manuela Lopez Menendez from the city of Buenos Aires. And the city of Buenos Aires has recently done a lot of things on urban mobility, on bicycle lane, and all of that is really benefiting both safety, but also decarbonizing the city. So we'll be looking forward to hearing some of the experience of Buenos Aires, and hopefully we can take that experience to other cities. Last but not least, Jeffrey White, who's been really a pioneer in Africa, especially working on a couple of issues. He comes from the NGO background, so mostly he can represent the NGO view, but they've been doing a lot of technical work when it comes on either school zone safety and motorcycle safety in Africa, which is a big problem. So today, Jeffrey will tell us a bit what they are seeing when it comes to motorcycle safety in particular in Africa, based on the work that Amend, the NGO that he leads, has been doing in Africa. So as you see, it's a very diverse panel, both from the NGO world, from the high-income country, from a city, from a big federal state, from the philanthropies, and hopefully we can cover as much ground as you had hoped to. attend and take away from this session. Let me start with Anne. Anne, you can maybe a bit of opening remark. Why are you here? I mean, there are many other sessions. What brought you to this session? Yeah?
I'm here because Saeed asked me to be here. He said, I've put you on a panel, and I said, oh, okay, what would you like me to talk about? So we've got a few questions, so most of what I'll talk about, I'll do then. Just a very quick intro, I'd say. The UK government has been interested in road safety and working in road safety for quite a long time. And I think on a domestic, in the domestic space, we're very good at it. And so we've been also in our aid program looking at how do we support the global road safety community. So we've been supporting the GRSF, the Global Road Safety Facility, since 2013, and we're proud to do so. We've seen it change a lot. We've seen it grow. We've seen a lot of impact from the work that GRSF does, and Saeed can tell you a lot more about that than I will. So we've been really pleased to be part of the facility itself. This idea of road safety and decarbonization and bringing those two thoughts together doesn't seem like a natural fit when you first think about it. And I'll come back to this when we get more into the discussion in a little bit. But I think it's an area that's really important. And you know, we talk in transport about the different pillars of transport, and you really can't talk about constructing roads, for example, without talking about safe roads. And you can't talk about safe roads without talking about the systems that manage those roads and the maintenance of those roads and so on. And not just roads, but you know, all of the modes of transport. So I think it's really important that we're talking about this today. I'm going to leave it there so that we've got plenty of time for other things. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Becky, again to you. How are you seeing really the change, the global dynamics? You've been in this for a while now. If you can tell us, share with us some remarks. And why a philanthropy is interested in road safety?
Yes. Thank you, Saeed. Great questions. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. And I think we realize we're the after lunch panel, so if people need to get up and stretch, and people are struggling with jet lag, so totally welcome to move around. So Mike Bloomberg sends his regards. He's actually in London hosting a summit on a partnership for healthy cities. For those who aren't familiar, he was mayor of New York City for 3 terms, so he really believes in the power of cities. And actually, we're partnering with the city of Buenos Aires, as well as 27 other cities in low and middle income countries to really move the needle on road safety. In addition, we're partnering at the national level with 15 countries, including with India, to advise in bringing up policies to international best practices. And I think we're making some progress. Whenever I meet with people, and I had a chance to have lunch with Mr. Kunal here, the first question is always, well, do you think we're going to meet the goal, the 50% reduction goal? And I have to say, it's a lot of shrugging of shoulders, and I think there's a lot more that we need to do as a global community to meet that goal and to support the governments that are trying so hard with limited resources to meet that goal. So that's why we as a private philanthropy are still in this. We take a look at what's killing the most people in the world, especially in low and middle income countries, and you can't ignore road safety. Road traffic injuries are the 12th leading cause of death internationally. It's the #1 cause of death for people aged 5 to 29. And I think that is the stat that gets often overlooked. Those are people coming into their prime earning years. So the impact on the economy is massive. I will say I'm not an engineer. I'm also not an environmental specialist, so I find it hard. I can't answer a lot of questions related to how to bridge those gaps. We come at this from the public health perspective. And then lastly, I'll just say that we are thankfully not the only private philanthropy in this space. Natalie Drayson is here from the FIA Foundation, which has been a long supporter of road safety. So we're pleased that them and some other private philanthropies are in this space, but happy to you know, that we're able to contribute somewhat in this and support mostly the governments that are really taking the lead on doing this work. I'll pause there because, like Ian, I think we have a lot of time for questions.
Thank you, Becky, very much. You set the scene for Mr. Joshi. Everybody is looking at India, right? I mean, if we do the good thing that India is doing, I think this is something we can take all over the world. So tell us briefly What are the things you are looking? I have few questions, of course, for you in detail, but tell us from the federal system to the state, what are the things you are looking at this point?
Certainly. Thank you so much, Saeed, and the World Bank team for having me here. In fact, such a pertinent problem and couldn't have been a better podium than this to highlight the issues, learnings, best practices from all across the world. Since it's necessary to put things in perspective from the India's point of view and the problem at which we are facing. We are losing across 150,000 people every year in India to road fatalities. To put it into perspective again, it's almost equivalent to 490 Boeing 747s crashing every year. Irony is people losing their lives, 80% of those people would never be able to purchase a ticket to a Boeing 747. The socioeconomic impact of people losing their lives in road fatalities, plunging people into deep poverty, and debilitating impact over lives of people. It is hence necessary and renew their lens about experiences from other panelists as well.
Thank you, Mr. Joshi. And of course, the challenges are very big, but also the success and the opportunity are very rewarding, and they are there. We look forward to continuing the conversation. Now let me move to Madam Secretary from Buenos Aires. There has been lots of achievement and in recent year. If you can just summarize quickly for the panel, what is the city under your leadership is currently doing, especially that we know that you've been tackling this under a mobility policy for the last decade or so. If you can share with us your thoughts, we'll be grateful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's good to be able to tell a story about what I've been doing in Buenos Aires City in the last almost 15 years. We started by 2009 with a mobility plan where we tackled three important things. The one is urban transport, the other was to promote active mobility, and the other one was road safety. Fortunately, 15 years after, we can measure a lot of good things in those. Because of our political leadership, it was very important for that, but also because we were all the time measuring what was happening and what we should do better if we wanted to tackle our goals, not only in road safety, where we had very good numbers, but also in urban transport, and of course in cycling. We were a city where it's a very flat city to cycle, but people weren't doing that. So we started a very ambitious plan to have bike lanes, and now we have 300 kilometers of bike lanes, and 10% of the trips every day are done by people in bicycles. And that is also matched with road safety, because what we did is safety bike lanes, but also make people that use private cars or buses to go in a better way on all those roads. So that's also very important. But also of the others, I think that there are many other things to tell you afterwards. So thank you for this.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, and thank you very much for sharing with us your experience. We look forward also to hearing more. Jeffrey, you sit also a bit seeing the whole landscape, and you are seeing everybody in front of you. Tell us briefly, what are you doing in terms of safety, and then the linkage with some of the climate change challenges, if you allow us.
Sure. So I'm the executive director and founder of Amend. We're a nonprofit, an NGO with offices in Ghana, Mozambique, and Tanzania. and we work across the continent on road safety issues. And increasingly, there are more and more ties with climate, clear ties. We work on a number of different areas. We do lots of scientific research, but the two areas that I've been asked to touch on today are motorcycles and infrastructure around schools. And we'll dig into it more, but with both of the issues, there are clear links with climate. There are also clear solutions to the problems. Just on the motos, to hopefully whet your appetite a little bit, in 2010 in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, it was estimated there were 2 million motorcycles in the continent. It's estimated by 2030 there'll be 60 million motorcycles in sub-Saharan Africa. If you can imagine a vehicle fleet change like that in that period of time, it's profound, and it's changing the continent very quickly in a lot of ways. We'll talk about some details. I really recommend you pick up this beautiful report that we just published with the FIA Foundation. They're at the WRI booth downstairs. Excellent photos, super readable. I'm not just saying that because we produced it. Everything you ever wanted to know about motorcycles in Africa, both injury and electrification, and more is in here. So pick one up.
And it's for free. So
And it's all, yeah, and it's all free. I'm not selling it. It's free. And we'll dig into some of the details on that. And with infrastructure, it's a similar thing. 250 child pedestrians are killed on the roads in Africa every day. So while we're in this session here, 10 children are going to be killed on the roads. 95% of children in Africa walk to school, which is a good thing, right? That's what we're struggling and working so hard for here in countries like the United States and Europe, is to get people walking and leading healthy lives. In a lot of ways in Africa, everybody's already doing that, but you need to make sure it's safe. And so we'll dig into some details there as well.
Thank you very much. Before we proceed, I think people who knows me, they know that sometimes I go off the script, and I think Nargis and my colleague are gonna also see that I would like to go a bit off the script. I would like to invite David Ward maybe to say a few words. David has been the founding chairman of the Global NCAP, and as you know, there is no crashes without a car, right? I mean, yeah, unless a motorcycle crash a pedestrian, but this is very little. But why don't we would welcome you here, and if you can say just a few words since you are here, thank you very much.
It's a bit unfair because I'm completely unprepared.
It's okay. It's okay.
I was very when I was at the FI Foundation. One of our proudest moments was giving the initial grant that enabled the facility to exist, and I chaired it for 2 years. So I'm very fond of the facility, and it's so I'm a substitute panelist. Football is very much in the stories in the UK at the moment, so I'm on the bench, but I've been pulled in. But anyway, I won't tweet anything that's going to annoy the government. But anyway, yeah, we work on vehicle safety a lot. And yesterday I had a very nice session at WRI talking about the technology intelligent speed assistance, which I would like to use the opportunity to flag up. Big game changer. The second largest vehicle market in the world, the European Union, is now mandating intelligent speed assistance across all its vehicle classes, including trucks and buses, for all vehicles in production from next year. It's retrofittable. There are retrofit systems of ISA. So it's something that really should be looked at, much higher on the agenda. For public sector fleets, buses and things, provided you have a digital map with the speed limits, you can get these systems to work. Transport for London have got it in their vehicle fleet. They're committed to have ISA on their entire bus fleet. They've done it also on their ancillary vehicles, 360 vehicles, and they've had a 90% reduction in speeding incidents. India has already got a speed limiter regulation on its the top speed, but ISA is the next step. So sorry, that's my little advert for ISA, but thanks very much.
Thank you so much, David. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I know you'll have very good remarks to say, especially to remind us about the new technology that's coming. Especially it's very relevant for electric vehicles. I think we can touch on that at some point. So let me come back to my script and to the panel. We'll be taking hopefully a bunch of questions, times permitting, because we want also to take a bit of both online, and feel free to prepare your questions, yeah? Even though the World Bank board is going to hear everything, but feel free to ask the panel any question you like. So, and I have a development, development financing. You come from, of course, a well-known development agency that has a long history of development financing. And throughout the year, you see you see priorities maybe going up and down and challenging coming up and down. At the World Bank, we have a new evolution roadmap now to focus a lot on global public goods also. So as far as we are concerned, there are a couple of priorities coming and targets and challenges. 3 of them are decarbonization, resilience, road safety. All of them are at the core of the transport system. So for you, you are sitting in a development aid, we are in charge of transport. Do you see this as competing priority, and how do you weigh these different priorities? If you can enlighten us a bit on this, that will be very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Saeed. So my first thought when you say, how do we weigh those priorities, is to think about, well, we have different types of money. So I sit in the Research and Evidence Division, so the programs that I do and the funding that I access is research funding. That's different to policy and delivery funding, for example. We have funding commitments like the International Climate Fund. So, are projects eligible for that, or are they not? How much budget do we have available? We've all seen changes in budgets as a result of COVID and other global phenomena, right? So my first thought is to think that way. We also look at where do we have a comparative advantage, where do we have good experience that we can share, where are the gaps? And so that's when we start to look, where can we try to fill the evidence base and come alongside people who are doing really good research and doing really good work and enhance what they do through our funding. So that's sort of the things that we think about. But then I come back to the beginning of your question and think, are these things mutually exclusive, right? You talk about decarbonization, about resilience, and about road safety. Are they mutually exclusive? And I think we've already in our introductions all been saying they are not, right? So I don't feel that I need to prioritize too much between them because each one reinforces the other. So for example, if you look at the global road safety stats and the road traffic accident statistics, the vast majority of accidents are happening in low-income countries. And the numbers, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, are extremely high. And then you look at who are the most vulnerable road users, and they are the pedestrians and the cyclists. And that's what the evidence shows us, that's what the data shows us. So if we work on road safety programs for pedestrians walking and cycling, we're also contributing to keeping transport low carbon, right? Because they're active non-emissions forms of transport. We also know from the evidence public transport is safer than private vehicles, right? And so if we're investing in making public transport more accessible for everyone and more affordable for everyone, then again, we're contributing to safer roads. So we see these things as mutually, not mutually exclusive, but inclusive. So I think that's probably the main thing for me to say. We have several programs. The high volume transport program works with Amend, and so I'm going to leave Jeffrey to talk more about that side of things. But we're certainly funding and supporting many of these kinds of activities. I guess the other thing that I'll just quickly touch on is data and the importance of data in what we do. And that data kind of crosses, again, all 3 of those areas, and means that if we've got the right data and the right data systems and we're investing in that, then we can bring all 3 of those areas together more effectively. And I'll point you to the IE Connect program, which we support. They've got a booth downstairs, and they can share a lot of the work that they've been doing in this road safety space.
Indeed, they are not mutually exclusive. We looked at every scenario of transport of decarbonization. You don't have any path to net zero without transport. But also we couldn't see any path to decarbonize transport and keep 1.3 million. I think the number has to come down because of the issue you mentioned about active mobility, about safe and clean vehicles, about the modal shift and keep pedestrian really in safe infrastructure. Otherwise, they're going to move to more polluting systems and more safety problem eventually. Becky, you, in Bloomberg Philanthropies, you have worked on this, and you have worked a lot on cities. At the beginning of the program, I remember you have a lot of focus on city, but then, of course, you expanded to national. But if you talk on city, you've been working since 2007. And what has been the co-benefits you've seen on when you introduce safety to a city? What has been the other benefit in creating a resilient and greener city together with safety in the city that you have worked with? If you can tell us a bit of some of these examples in the city, what are the results you have seen in bringing these three aspects together? Thank you.
Thanks, Saeed. And I just loved Anne's answer, so I want to echo what you said, that they're mutually inclusive. So we've been funding road safety efforts since 2007. And we actually conducted an evaluation to measure our impact. And the way the foundation measures impact, and Mike Bloomberg wants us to, is through what is called lives saved. So how many deaths have we prevented from our investments? And we had a fabulous researcher do this. And so from 2007 to 2018, the impact of our work had saved over 311,000 lives. This is just the road safety program, not the entire foundation. And among those, about 28,000 were from the shifts to active mobility and BRT, so sustainable urban transport systems like BRTs, not from the prevention of crashes that would have happened, but from transitioning people into walking, biking, active mobility, and the BRT systems, as well as the cleaner air and the reductions in asthma-related deaths. So that's a pretty solid number. So about 30,000, about a tenth of the lives that we've saved were not from crashes avoided, but from these other co-benefits from the environment. I think, like Anne said, when you design cities or you design your interventions around the most vulnerable, which are going to be pedestrians and bicyclists, you actually make the system safer for all of the road users, including car occupants, including motorcyclists, bus drivers, et cetera. We have seen, and we had a great meeting actually with the team from DACA earlier today. The mayor is here. And I'm looking forward to meeting with Manuela to talk about Buenos Aires. But we've seen when cities embrace that ethos and when they flip the paradigm of who we're designing the roads for. GDC, our partner Global Designing Cities Initiative, is here. They're over there. They have this great map, and they show we need to shift it from designing the streets for cars at the top, put cars at the bottom of who we're designing it for. We're actually designing streets in our cities for the pedestrians and the bicyclists. Then we introduce the motorcyclists, the other vulnerable road users that are motorized. And then at the very bottom, as almost the afterthought, are the cars. We'll have the roads for them. They'll get to where they need to go. But when we actually do that and the cities embrace that ethos and that perspective, we see massive scale up. So Manuela talked about 300 kilometers of bike lanes. I have a recent stat from a different city, if I can find it. It was over 500, in Fortaleza. Fortaleza is a city in Brazil, and they met the goal. They reduced fatalities by over 50% in a 5-year period, and they have 524 kilometers of bike lanes. They also reduced their speed limit. So they went from, it was over 60K, they have 50K citywide, and then they've also done some corridors at 30K. So they took this comprehensive approach, and that led to their reduction in fatalities, but it also led to this, again, this change in their culture and their prioritization of their streets and the way they allocated it to be more for active mobility, public transport, and then the cars are there. Obviously, we're not saying there will be no cars, but they're not designing them as the priority. So I'll leave it there.
So designing city, I think today somebody in the panel said the most important is how you design city, then the transport system will fit in how actually you design the city, which is very interesting concept to learn also from some of the successes we are seeing. As you said, some of the cities in Latin America have had a lot of success, and we need to highlight this. This is not only a big challenge and problem, but there's still lots of successes that I think we can and we should highlight. I'll come back later on to Ms. Secretary, but let me go to Mr. Joshi about the government of India. As we know, unfortunately, after the post-pandemic recovery, we have seen again the traffic is going up, and the number are mostly in most countries are actually at the level what they were pre-pandemic. It's very clear. We've looked at many countries. It's very clear we are back in 2018, 2019, 2020. That reduction was just because of the pandemic, and it did not sustain. But government of India have recently really started taking more and more attention in terms of addressing this problem. Again, from a very complex system, not only the biggest country in terms of population, but it's a federal state system. So if you can tell us what is the government of India doing at the federal level and working with the states, both in terms of policy and financing and some of the practical intervention to address road safety.
Sure. So to put things in perspective, road safety in India is a classic textbook political economy problem, where there are multiple stakeholders and responsibilities have been equally divided among those stakeholders, with the incentive structure being such that the actors and the legislators are at a length where there could be more coordination between them, and to sort of implement the legislations that are originally planned for reducing road accidents or crashes. Essentially, the union government is responsible for legislating, and the state governments or the provincial governments are responsible for enforcing the law. Now, the problem is any sort of a stringent enforcement is a classic political no-no for a state government. And excessive fining is a problem where it is looked upon as a political problem, which is why a robust sort of a revamp of the approach towards road safety was needed. In 2019, the Government of India amended the Motor Vehicles Act, which is the principal legislation which gives the power to the actors to act upon road safety. I think the primary sort of achievement of that legislation was to step up and redefine the way it was affixing responsibilities towards its stakeholders. Before the Motor Vehicles Act, it was either the driver or the victim who was sort of looked upon as responsible for the sort of eventuality or the accident. But after the Motor Vehicles Act, we ensured that all the stakeholders which contribute, unfortunately, towards a fatality or a crash are held responsible. This starts from road engineering. We have ensured that contractors or even government agencies which are responsible for building roads build roads according to the originally planned DPRs or the project reports, as the governments are or were supposed to build the roads. If at all there's a gap, the legislation provides for enough space where the road agencies could also be penalized or be held accountable if the fault is so sort of identified. Vehicle engineering, I mean, this has been a major space where we have ensured that not only the OEMs or the automobile companies, but we have ensured that an ecosystem of incentives is again sort of nurtured in the Indian automobile industry, where the demand for safer vehicles is sort of, comes from the consumers itself. Indian automobile industry is a heavily cost-sensitive industry where any sort of a delta in the cost for an automobile would be directly passed upon onto the consumers, which is why it was observed that there is a need to sort of ensure that the consumers themselves demand for safer vehicles, and what best than an NCAP program, which is why we are coming up with a NCAP program for India as well, Bharat NCAP program, wherein we would be ensuring that the demand comes from the market in itself. And I'm really happy to see that some OEMs in India have already started sort of marketing their cars on the basis of how many stars they've got in global NCAP, or hopefully now they'll be getting in Bharat NCAP as well, as we call it in India. And there's been a modal shift. I mean, earlier they were talking about how comfortable their cars are, what is the leg space, but the infotainment systems, and now they've started talking about how safer their cars are. This is the modal shift that we are trying to bring in from the incentive level. The other option would, or the natural option would have been upgrading the regulations in itself, but that would have passed on the cost to the consumers. But in this case, the suppliers or the OEMs themselves would be providing safer cars to the consumers in India. Rest of the interventions include education. I firmly believe that road safety in India is equally a behavioral issue as well. It is extremely pertinent to note, it is important to note that the tier 2 and tier 3 cities in India and the choices they make for themselves for transit, it's important to ask ourselves that have we ensured that we provide them with public transit which is safe, affordable, comfortable and convenient at the same point of time. If the answer is no, because of capacity constraints of all the LMICs, then the other option is to ensure that the existing fleet or the existing road infrastructure is sort of secured in a way where supplementary restraint systems are put into place so that there is an immediate saving of lives that happens, and simultaneously there can be an approach towards increasing the capacity of public transport towards decarbonizing, which is also the mutually inclusiveness which we were just discussing as of now. So I think the lens towards looking this problem has been sort of upgraded, so as to say, and hopefully the interventions that are being taken and will be taken along with the multilateral development banks. We are working on a state support program, developing the state support program worth $1 billion along with World Bank and the ADB. And this program would be a silver bullet to solve this political economy problem, where states would not have to fund themselves essentially for procuring the digital infrastructure for enforcement of these laws. Due to the support of the MDBs, we would be solving that challenge at least, and would be ensuring that the true letter and spirit of the Motor Vehicles Amendment Act, which the legislation which we bought, would be enforced at the grassroots levels.
Thank you very much, and we'll be very happy, and we look forward to supporting. I see our team leaders from India, Arnab and Deepan, who has been really instrumental in that program. I would like to thank them and keep offering our support. GRSF has been, as you know, supporting this program. So we look forward, because it's a transformational program. If it works, it's really a transformational program. Let me move to Madam Secretary. I think part of what I'm going to ask you was already mentioned, but we would like to have more light on the famous 300 kilometer that everybody talks about, bicycle lane in Buenos Aires. If you can tell us, please, what has been the challenges, but also what has been the quick wins or the wins that you already have seen now in terms both of safety and carbon impact of putting this bike network in place, and how have you really bringing all this network into a cohesive and safe mobility network throughout the city? Thank you.
Well, as you all know, in our cities, our main challenge is to make people understand that we need to give the streets to the people and not to the cars. And when you are discussing about bike lanes, everything is about taking parking spaces from the streets. And we have seen before, but post-pandemic also, that people are more and more eager to put their cars in the street and not in parallel parkings. So this has been a challenge during all these years, but I think that once we started to be able to win this battle in different neighborhoods, then it was easier to continue our path. And we also started to change our view about that, because sometimes in some neighborhoods that are maybe there are big streets and there is enough space to keep parking and also to have the bike lane. We also did that in a way of having this approach with the neighborhoods, but we also started to use the street for other things with the bike lanes as places for the restaurants to be there, places, small parks for people to use in front of their houses. So we have been changing the way we have been setting up these bike lanes in conversation with the neighbors, because it's very important that made us possible to have these 300 kilometers of bike lanes, and hopefully to continue increasing this, because although we have a very interesting network right now, we also know that we will have some places where we have to go further, especially because we have more and more bikers every day. As I was telling you before, we have 10% of the trips done by bicycle. Is a lot for our city. So we start to see that in some places we have like congestion, you know, and in those places we need to think where we should have a new bike lane to solve this. And what we did during pandemic is we started to have also bike lanes in very important avenues, and that made us increase a lot the amount of people using that bike lane. For example, in one of them it was 400% in 3 or 4 months. And a very good thing that we saw is that many women were starting to bike because of feeling safe, being in streets that they see that they have people and movement all the day, and a very good light. So we also saw that now more or less 30% of the people using bikes are women. Before it was less than 10%. And as I was telling you before, for us it is very important to have measures of everything what we are doing, to see not only road safety, but our gender agenda, our safety, but not in the road safety issue only, but also people feeling safe in their city. That is also very important if you want to bike. So we have worked on all of that. And related with road safety, what we decided to do is where we have a bike lane, the speed limit is 30 instead of 40 that is in other streets in the city. And another very important bike lane that we launched last year and we finished it a month ago is Libertador Avenue. That is more like a complete street where we thought about pedestrians, we thought about bikers, but also about public transport. And what we did there is leaving the same amount of lanes for cars, we reduced the size. So we, in a way, reduce the speed of the cars there. You know that in many of our cities, it's very difficult, the discussion about speed. And sometimes you have to have some quick wins with some kind of these things, and then you go to the discussion of really reducing the speed limits. But we also have a lot of cameras that are controlling speed, not only in the avenues, but also in streets. And we are also having a lot of these cameras that are controlling that cars are not invading the bike lanes. That is also a problem in some of our bike lanes. So we have been working a lot so that we continue to promote people to go to this active mobility that is so important.
Thank you very much for sharing with us all of this, and we look forward to keep learning as you move forward by extending the bike network and reducing the speed. I think it's very key that you are also addressing the speed limit together with the bike lane infrastructure. Thank you for sharing this with us. Jeffrey, let me go back to your work on both. I mean, you mentioned exactly the example you are working on, the motorcycle issue in Africa. But tell us from your experience, do you see a connection between road safety and climate change? One of them is very quick, short term, which is road safety. Another one is a bit longer term, the climate change. How do you see that connection, especially in Africa?
Sure. So, as we know, two-wheelers are getting electrified in a lot of the world. In sub-Saharan Africa, the vast majority of motorcycles are still petrol. And there are many, many reasons for this. They're much less expensive to start. The commercial riders are very, very price sensitive. And these are commercial motorcycle riders who earn between $1 and $3 a day in profit. So these are folks who can't afford a more expensive upfront electric motorcycle. There are a number of startups working in the area in sub-Saharan Africa. It's probably less than 1% of the market at the moment. It's a function of cost and a function of charging infrastructure as well. And that's because in a lot of these countries, the electricity grids are intermittent, and you can't count on being able to get your bike refilled. But the general, and the interesting thing is, in this report, again, I'm not selling it because it's free, But in this report, about 20% of the report, 25% is about electrification, 75% is about road safety. But we have a version in French and a version in English. We did launches in Lomé, Togo, and in Nairobi. And the majority of the conversation and the media attention was to the electrification. That's where the interest is. So the important thing is to build road safety into this transition to electrification. It's going to happen, and it's going to reach a tipping point in sub-Saharan Africa. We don't know when. It's when the economics actually start to make sense. But the last thing you want is an electrified fleet that's still killing people all over the continent, right? And there are things you can do. David and I were talking earlier. ABS, mandating ABS on models, that's a political issue. That's a lobbying problem to try to accomplish that. Noise emitters on the motorcycles. The real issue, this describes in great depth the situation and the problems and the solutions. The issue with motorcycles in sub-Saharan Africa is there's no low-hanging fruit when it comes to solutions right now, because they have to do with policy change, helmet standards. It's difficult to get these political changes. The area where we do have something that we know works and that we can scale up today is our work with Said and GRSF on safe infrastructure around schools. And let me just give a little bit of background to this. This is a program we've been working on for more than 10 years. We started with the FIA Foundation, where we identify high-risk schools in urban sub-Saharan Africa, where at least 2% of children are being injured a year. We put in infrastructure, essentially separating children from traffic and slowing speeds around schools. We then did a control study with the CDC in the US, and this proved, this was one of the greatest moments in my life, honestly, when I got the data and we saw this thing reduces injuries and deaths by over 27%. It was thrilling, you know, it works, right? And we proved it. But a nonprofit and a foundation can't build all of the infrastructure across sub-Saharan Africa. That's for governments, development banks. We won the WRI Ross Prize for Cities, which gave us a lot of attention for this program for road safety around schools. So over years, we built up the evidence base. We got more and more recognition from it. And in the last few years, we've been working with Said and his team at GRSF and TTLs at the bank across sub-Saharan Africa to take these principles and embed them in development bank financed projects. So we go in and give technical assistance to the governments that are the clients in the bank's terminology for these loans to make sure that they're designed with the communities in mind. And this, simply put, works. We provide this technical assistance. The roads around schools and in communities are built differently, they're built safely, and it saves lives, and it works. So that's a little bit of a story of how it starts with, it takes everybody. It takes a WRI, it takes an FIA Foundation, it takes a World Bank, it takes a division within the World Bank, it takes the UK, the ex-DFID, FCDO now, to fund some of the research that provided the backup and knowledge base to prove this work. This work works. I just do want to add that, adapting to the local context is very important. All of our staff, other than myself and one other person, are Africans. You need to listen to the local governments, interview the local people, learn how they use the roads. There are principles of road safety that work everywhere, slowing speeds and separating pedestrians from traffic. But not everything is the same. Bicycles, which are working well for you there, or what they call tactical urbanism, works in some places, but in the context where we work, it's not as relevant for a variety of reasons. So using principles that are proven to work while staying very local and close to the ground is what gets the results. And as I said earlier, the exciting thing in the tie-in with climate change is preventing modal shift in sub-Saharan Africa. We have a huge opportunity there now. These roads are being built now. The infrastructure of Africa is being built now over the next 10, 20 years. And if we build it to incorporate safety for two-wheeled vehicle users and pedestrians, they're going to walk and they're going to use bikes and motorcycles, and that's going to have these climate benefits. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for this comprehensive overview. And we look forward to keep working together, especially on addressing some of these challenges, in which, as you said, are not very quick wins, but there is some quick wins on some side, but some, especially the vehicle aspect, usually it's what takes a bit. But we have to start, and we know what works and what does not work. So let's start on these. I think we will open it up now for the questions from the, if you just introduce yourself, if you have a specific question for one of the panelists. If not, then maybe I can guide your question to one of the panel. Please.
Hi, my name is Jaman Kubba from the International Transport Workers Federation, and thank you firstly. It's been really helpful and really good to have these conversations. I just wanted to ask all the panelists, actually, there's been a lot of conversation around decarbonisation and the link to road safety, which is extremely important. But we're in a situation where we're already seeing existing climate realities which are affecting communities. They're already dealing with things like extreme heat, changing precipitation, things like dust storms. It's already extreme for some of them. Obviously, we work with workers, which I'm sad to say are not represented here, so I just want to make sure their voice is heard. One of the things we've been doing is talking to workers on the ground at the local level to understand what issues they're facing, and they are themselves coming up with things that can be done. So, for example, bringing in increasing rest stops. So when you're working in extreme heat for longer periods, you can rest more, so you're less likely to have an accident because you've rested. Things like face masks in a dust storm, those kinds of things. But the problem is if that constituency isn't heard in the planning, it's just missed. And that's one of the problems we're facing at the moment. The voices are coming in too late. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we will welcome all views. So we apologize we couldn't have everybody, but this is very important. And I think from the way we had the panel, it was slightly more toward decarbonization and less on resilience. So many of the things you mentioned are resilience. So we can maybe shed some light that this is not only decarbonization, but it's, as I said, decarbonization is a bit long term, but the quick term, as you mentioned, what's hitting us now. I understand Argentina has a very heat wave lately and longer summer maybe than usual. So it's hitting now, definitely. So we'll be happy maybe at some point to come back to the panel. Let me take another question, then maybe 2 or 3. Emma, please, if you introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Emma McLennan. I'm the director of the Eastern Alliance for Safe and Sustainable Transport. We've always been called safe and sustainable because we believe that you can't divide the two. There's no such thing as sustainable transport without safety. It just isn't. People won't use it. What I wanted to do today, there's so much that's been so interesting that I've heard. For example, from Kunal Joshi, I was really pleased to hear how you're holding engineers and agencies to account for making mistakes in the countries where we work. We've seen contractors ignoring the plans entirely with dire results, and I think that's a big issue. So I'm interested to hear of your experience with this. But I want to raise a different issue, and that's inclusive. It's a word that we haven't really discussed much. And it's important to, we've always said that if you design streets that are safe for somebody in a wheelchair or somebody who's blind or someone who's deaf, they're safe for everybody, they're better for everybody, they're actually better for business as well. But what I haven't seen much of, we work in cities, we've had support from the GRSF to work in Azerbaijan with Global Designing Cities Initiative in Sumgait doing city planning and design, which is inclusive for children. But there's so little for people in rural areas. And if you look at the poorest countries, the poorest people in the poorest countries are in rural areas. And they suffer from mobility poverty. And I've seen too often donor projects where the roads, corridor roads, I know Jeffrey's seen this in Africa a lot, there are corridor roads where, not like in Northern Europe or the United States where you have hubs of cities and towns dotted along, they're not conurbations. They're people building all along these corridor roads. And the corridor roads, when they're made high speed, divide communities. They make an unsafe environment for pedestrians, for children, for agricultural vehicles. And so I just want to make a plea and maybe ask for comment from all of you to think about rural sustainability, rural inclusivity, and rural safety, which is so often. And one last thing, I can't help myself. I see that, oh yeah, let's think about that. Let's build an overbridge. Overbridges and underpasses are not sustainable, they are not inclusive, they are not safe. People don't use them. People in wheelchairs cannot use them unless they're very expensive. So that's it for me, sorry.
Thank you very much. So let's take the workers' question. How are we addressing the resilience in terms of workers? Who would like to take that? Mr. Joshi, you have two questions, so maybe you can go on the contractor side. What are you trying to do on that, especially not the engineers, but also the contractors who are actually building the road, but not being following, and there is a lot of role, on the contractual arrangement, the supervision engineer, what India has been doing on that. And then if you can address a bit the rural, because that's also a big problem on your national highway system, I would presume. If you can also touch on the rural, then we can take the workers' questions.
Of course.
Mr. Joshi, please.
So the roads are prepared as a part of a DPR, the detailed project report, which is approved by the government and then given on to a contractor to build the road, and is supposed to be then monitored and supervised by the government's road building agencies. The legislation which I mentioned about, the Amendment Act of 2019, provides for sections where it could hold the road contractors, concessionaires, and the supervising agencies to be accountable for deviations from the original DPRs, which could potentially cause accidents. We term them as black spots. Data, as it was mentioned, it's extremely important to have a robust data collection system for road safety. Road accident data is something that it's still work in progress for India. We're working on a system called as IRAD, which is Integrated Road Accident Database, which ensures that data from the law enforcement agencies is collected at a central level, and black spots are marked on different stretches along highways, and special attention is given to those areas which are more accident prone, and temporary and permanent measures are carried out by the contractor. So that's pretty much in the law, and it is being carried out. We've had excellent response to that as well. Of course, we are getting there one step at a time. It's not perfect. We are towards making that as a sort of a systemic institutional setup, basically. To address your second question, I think it is extremely relevant to address this issue. In the last 15 to 20 years in India, the amount of urbanization that has happened, people have migrated from semi-rural areas towards the cities, and due to economic reasons, the settlement is around the periphery of these cities, and because of the lands are cheaper, the building costs are cheaper, they settle there. But the problem is, while they settle there, they sort of tend to take the transportation systems which are less regulated and less structured by virtue of them being outside of the formal city limits, which causes a formal conflict of the humans and the traffic. Because in the peripheries, the national highway networks are very robust, and they're meant to be providing a high speed movement for goods and passengers. But when there is an informal and unregulated structure of transport which has a conflict with high passenger traffic on the national highways, on the peripheries of cities, that is where maximum crashes happen. And again, sort of touching on to the point of most vulnerable road users there are the pedestrians who have to cross the roads. You cannot make all the roads access controlled in any sort of a developing country, because there are costs associated with it. So I think sustainable urban planning is extremely imperative to ensure that the human traffic conflict is minimized, and inclusive transport, as I just mentioned, we have to ask these questions of providing safe, affordable and comfortable sort of public transport to these people who live in the semi-urban areas. And by the time we do that, it is necessary for us to ensure that the existing systems are safe enough.
Saeed, Becky, please go ahead.
Can I just add, and Emma, I want to thank you for that question, and I want to acknowledge that we all need to do better on this, because when we look at the data, and we have a lot of data from the 27 partner cities that Bloomberg is supporting, most of the deaths, and this is city data, but most of the fatalities are happening in certainly some of the high capacity corridors within the city, but the peri-urban areas, of those big, usually state or federal owned highways that are coming into the city. Unfortunately, the way we've set up our program is to support the city. So we have an MOU with the Secretary of Mobility and with the mayor's office. And then we get into the details of things and we find out, oh gosh, but now we need to work with the state or the regional or the national government, because those are who govern the roads where all the fatalities are happening. So we've expanded our work in Sao Paulo and Mumbai to the state level. So now we're working with the Sao Paulo state government and the Maharashtra state government. But we need to do more, so thank you for that reminder.
Thank you very much. Let's move a bit on the inclusion. On the workers, maybe I'll pick up a point. And Justine, if you can tell us a bit about the inclusiveness, that it's very important, not only for rural, but all over the agenda, inclusive. And we've seen from Buenos Aires that the bicycle lane were very good also in terms of the gender aspect of transport. But in the broader scheme, if you can tell us a bit about that, because it has been raised twice. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really glad that the word inclusion came up and hadn't come up before. It was in my notes. I just didn't use the word. And I could talk about this forever, and we don't have that long. But as Becky was talking, I was thinking about, the London Olympics, which is not a road safety example, but let me very, very briefly tell you something about the London Olympics. It was the first Olympics where the Paralympics came first. And the design of the whole facility was done with the Paralympics in mind, not the Olympics themselves. And because of that, the whole facility is completely accessible for people with all sorts of different mobility, vision, hearing disabilities, as well as, those of us who may not be able to walk as far and have to rest. There's regular rest stops. They're, so accessible for the elderly, accessible for the young. It was also delivered at lower cost because they put those considerations first. And I think that there's a lesson in that for all of us in our planning to think, as Becky was, and others were saying, to think about the end users first, to think about the most vulnerable users first. I think there's also a couple of issues here around standards and enforcement. We've talked a little bit about that, and ensuring that your enforcement systems look at corruption in the system, and you've got ways to make sure that things are being built to the standards that they're supposed to be built to. The other thing with inclusion is not just the inclusion of people, but the impact of road safety on people's health, right? So road traffic accidents are not just causing deaths, they're causing injuries. And they are a source of disability, or a cause of disability, as well as something that we need to be considering as users of the transport services. So we need, that gives even more imperative for us to get this as right as we possibly can.
Thank you very much. Before I take the workers, so I will maybe take that from the World Bank perspective, if my colleagues would allow me. So the World Bank, we still call it new, but it's not new anymore. The latest environmental and social framework, ESF, that came in 2018, has very good focus and separate on labor management. And actually now the World Bank, in every loan, it's asking its borrower to prepare what we call a labor management plan. So maybe we need to take a look at this management plan, how much they are addressing the issues you mentioned, like resilience and all of that, when it comes to actual road construction. There was one comment that came here, which I would like to mention, which we will be maybe taking note of it, because I think it's good. They said they very much appreciate the link between the three topics, resilience, decarbonization, safety, but they said it will be good maybe to come up with some indicators that glue these three things together. So composite indicators. So this is something we will take up maybe within the bank, but I would urge also ask our colleagues, our government, to think about how can we link these three things more from a performance perspective, not just from an intervention or program, some sort of indicator or something. There is a session coming on Thursday. We are doing it together with ITF and the Inter-American Development Bank, where there is a sort of talk about an indicator linking more mobility, safety, and decarbonization. So if you have time and you'll be here, I'll invite you to join us. It's on Thursday at 2 p.m., I believe. It's a side event. I think I've been asked that I need to allow you 10 minutes to stretch because they need you back in the Preston auditorium at 3. Unless there is some concluding remark, Ms. Secretary, you want to conclude with something?
No, I just wanted to say something related
Please.
with workers that I think is a very good a point and a very good question. I think that during COVID, we as in my case as a city, we were in charge of we have the metro. We were in charge of the metro, but we also have a lot of relationship with the federal government related with buses and trains. And I think that during that, we were able to work a lot with the unions and the workers to define what was the best for everybody, because we needed workers to be able to continue working, to take essential workers to their jobs, but also we had to take care of them. So I think that it's important to start to think how this climate change that is happening, as you said, Said, in Buenos Aires we had a heat for longer than we were used to, or sometimes is another thing is very cold or it's very rainy or whatever. We have to start to think about the workers, because we need them to be part of the solution, and we know that in transport they are very important because they are the ones that help us move millions of people every day. So I think that is something really interesting to start to think together, because this seems to continue at least for some more years, and we need to be prepared.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. I would like to thank the panelists and give them a round of applause. Most of you had to travel. I would like to thank also all the participants for selecting this session. I know there were a couple, but also I would like to thank my GRSF colleague who has been working for the last couple of weeks and months. We are like the bride and the groom. We show up in the wedding, but these things took a bit of time to put together. So I would like to thank all our colleagues. They are all of them here. And thank you very much. Thank you for doing this. Thank you.